Hi, I'm Tala from Divine Heretic Astrology, and I want to do a series of three asteroids that I use. And I've been kind of doing this thing, I think I almost call it like Gnostic astrology, but just kind of start as a baseline. I want to kind of explain what Gnosticism is and how I use it in reference to astrology, kind of an intro to this. So, you know, uh, in most ancient Gnostic texts, well, let me actually start at the very beginning. Like, there's there's many flavors and different sects of Gnosticism. And this is starting around, 300, 400 BCE. All this great stuff was going on, like all these Greek texts were being copied, and there was the Library of Alexandria, and it was really kind of this movement of Hellenistic astrology, which techniques that, I still use today. It's probably the primary basis of my practice are these techniques, tried and true. But during this time, there was a lot of pagans, the Druids, the nature societies, and right around this time, the Roman Empire started basically slaughtering massive amounts of these people. Now, sometimes you talk to reborn Christians and they're just going on about how, so many Christians were slaughtered, but actually the amount of Gnostics were way, way more, millions. And a lot of what they call early Christians were really Gnostic Christians, because like I was saying earlier, there's many different sects and flavors of Gnosticism. So we didn't even know that what the Gnostics were called. Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means to know. And we didn't know they were called Gnostics until we discovered like I say, like I personally did it, but no, people discovered the Nag Hammadi scrolls, also known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And in these texts and codexes, there's quite a few important documents. And I'm going to be referring to one kind of a lot, which is this one, the Secret Book of John. More on that in a second. There's a reason why it was a secret. Anyways, they were only referenced to in ancient texts, not as Gnostics, but as heretics. So you can see it kind of encompassed all these different, sects of people. And the heretics, like the word just means to choose. So basically, when you kind of really start looking at it, what you have is the Roman Empire having to drive everybody into a master-slave relationship. And we still have this structure in the world today. Like, think about it. You have a cop, you have a tyrannical yet loving dad, you have the principal at your school, you have the government telling you to pay taxes, All of these relationships feel traumatizing to a lot of people because we grew up so traumatized, because they are traumatizing. They're master-slave relationships and that you don't have any say. Now, the difference between all these, the pagans and the Gnostics and all the people basically that didn't go, with the Roman Empire, we're in these mutual reception relationships, which is kind of our natural state. You and your best friend most likely have a mutual reception relationship where you both get things from each other. And most importantly, we have a mutual reception relationship with the earth. We live on this planet. It provides us plant medicine. It provides us food. Like the Gnostics really believe that the planet is like a living cosmos. It's actually, intelligence and sentience, which I believe as well. The whole cosmos is. And so this is kind of reflected in the myth of Sophia, and I'll get to that in a moment. But, when you think of these mutual reception relationships, there's no kind of, you're not made to be what is it like subservient, you're not necessarily even made to pray because you're giving away this power in a sense. And a lot of power structures, even when you look at things like Alcoholics Anonymous, which is AA, based on basically I can never remember the exact phrasing, the argentum Asanam. It's basically based off Aleister Crowley work. And if you look up Bill W. and his return to psychedelics, AA gets really kind of gnarly. And I only bring this up because a lot of people who have addiction issues, which I see as an astrologer, go to AA. And even the most you hear people all the time, they're like, oh, like I'm an atheist, so I go to an AA group and my higher power is the ocean. So they still make you pick a higher power. They make you pick something. And that's kind of anti-Gnostic. I should say. And that's why they were kind of so controversial, because there isn't a higher power. You are basically God. And when you kind of read their text, you can kind of understand why they fought so hard, the Romans fought so hard for thousands and thousands of years. And I'm going to get into this topic more and more because it fascinates me. And there's different sects of Gnosticism, and there's ones that believe that there was a Jesus, and maybe Mary Magdalene was his wife, or maybe this is just a reference to an alchemical process, or maybe Judas was crucified in lieu of Jesus. There's like an imposter, very holy blood, holy grail of them. Um, to There was no Jesus whatsoever, that it was completely concocted by the Roman Empire. And I'm really interested in researching this, and it really gets you a lot of pushback because people don't like having their sky dad or their idols or their masters taken away. But it's kind of one of the things to really examine, like figure out like what do I believe? Don't be afraid to question the foundation. If the foundation is rotten, then you got to pull everything down, right? So how do I use this in astrology? Well, it's super helpful because in addition to, the usual bells and whistles, is we can look for certain asteroids. So let me just go back to one of the asteroids that I look for, and I'll go more into detail about how I use this in the next video. So this is Sophia. She's an Aeon. It's I won't go into exactly. I'm trying to make it like really as brief as possible. But she basically what happens is Sophia has a desire to create, so she falls. It's like the fall of Sophia, and this is probably most likely what the fall in the Bible is actually referring to. She falls. It's also very similar to the Big Bang, because when you read some of the Gnostic texts, it almost seems really similar to what Immanuel Velikovsky was talking about in Worlds in Collision. And if you don't know who he is, he had a pretty ongoing dialogue with Einstein for a long time, and apparently his book was open on Einstein's desk when he passed. But Einstein agreed that he had read his book like 7 or 8 times, and it was a very compelling idea, the idea of a plasma universe, an electrical universe. So the fall of Sophia kind of almost mimics what we call like the Big Bang, like this big, plasma discharge. And in Gnostic text, she falls into the earth, and she basically creates as she falls, and she imbues herself into the planet, creating a living cosmos. This is why we have Gaia or Sophia or this living earth, right? In the Gnostic text, there's a specific word that it's a dio. I can't remember. I should have done better notes, but in this text, it basically is saying it invites you how to participate in the correction of Sophia. Because here's the thing, when Sophia fell, she created these things called archons. And I'm going to go into this as well as more detail because I think these archonic spirits are kind of, they're kind of these forces that kind of shape our planets. And this idea is nothing new, like the mystics and the theosophists and the, you know, Rudolf Steiner, Gurdjieff, all these people believe in these forces, these kind of unseen forces that shape our world. And it's something that has been removed completely from our consciousness, almost completely from our consciousness today, because we're just taught that these things don't exist. But meanwhile, if you read, any older book older than a few hundred years, you know, they're convinced there's people get possessed by demons, and there's gods, and there's these forces who are making sacrifices, and it goes on throughout human culture. And so now we're just supposed to believe that none of that is real, and we just live in this purely scientism kind of world where Fauci is the ultimate authority, right? So you have to kind of re-examine these things. And like I see archonic influence in a lot of factors. In Zoroastrianism, there was really famously the angry man who becomes Rudolf Steiner's Ahriman. Now, Ahriman is just like a new force that humans need to learn to kind of wrestle with and conquer, according to Rudolf Steiner. I'm not sure. Sometimes I think Steiner was also being channeled by an archonic entity, but that's a whole nother point. But the thing of Ahriman is it's just cold and crystallizing and makes everything similar. And like we see this Ahrimanic influence all the time. It's kind of, the rise of like AI and computers. It's kind of, there's no emotion. It's crystallized. it's really kind of the over it's like Saturn like but final boss level Saturn. And so when you see, for example, like every car that you see on the road is like black, gray, or white. You don't see brightly colored cars anymore. When we had people wearing all these masks, it was this very harmonic influence where everyone looks the same. When you have women, shooting up Botox into their face where they have no expression, that's very harmonic. And this is like a very harmonic force. And hey, if you drive like a gray car and you get Botox every month, like I'm not, not knocking it, okay? I'm just pointing out that it's like it's one of these influences that you can see. And when you look at the world and it seems really gray and concrete, and you go to any major city and see these industrial lofts, that's kind of an expression of this harmonic spirit. Okay, so but back to the Gnostics. So Sophia turns into the living earth. And there's a really great book actually called The New Wild. I'll maybe put up in the notes. I highly recommend. And it talks about how I'm not a big Jordan Peterson fan, but he talks about how the earth is like like is not a helpless maiden, like she's completely in control. And this is something that, that people believed for a very long time. When I was in school for botany, I was arguing with one of my professors about how the Druids harvested mistletoe. Now, mistletoe it's a parasitic plant, so it grows on trees and eventually kills them. And in Europe, they've used this medication called Iscador, Iscador, for a very long time. It's fermented mistletoe, and they use it and they inject it into, carcinogenic tumors, which makes sense because, the plant signature, doctrine of signatures, mistletoe is parasitic. And so when I was arguing with my botany professors about how the Druids would gather mistletoe, because they would do it on, I believe it's the sixth day after the new moon in December, they would wear these robes and it couldn't touch the ground, and they would use a golden sickle to harvest the mistletoe, and then they would spread it around to everyone in the village so they could use it for healing properties. Now, when I argued with my professor that there was something to all this, he was completely dismissive and he was like, people just like rituals. I was like, oh, so they're just, just like magic and spirits and possession, people were just doing this for thousands of years. But now we're like, nope, those people were just crazy for most of our recorded history, right? So I have the same idea when you look at Gnosticism. And if you go out into nature, obviously you can tell that, it's a living cosmos if you really spend your time out there and really pay attention, right? So, anyways, this Big Bang plasma, Sophia falls, she mistakenly creates the archons, which also goes against the idea of a god that makes mistakes because it was a big fuck up on her part to create the archons. But Sophia means wisdom because when there's a mistake that's made, we we correct it. Like a truly wise person will go back and say, you know what, I was wrong. And now I've reconsidered it and looked at these options and I've learned from it. And this is how you learn. So, like I was saying in the Gnostic text, there's invitations in certain texts to participate in the correction of Sophia, because when you have the earth like, adjusting like sulfur levels here, or putting out new species here, or having animals go extinct here, or new plants suddenly crop up, that's the earth trying to recalibrate itself as a living being. And we are like, oh, it's climate change and it's non-native plants, but the earth knows exactly what the fuck she's doing. And I'm not saying obviously that you should let some plants just grow completely everywhere, but every plant is doing something whether you know it or not, or whether it maybe not even be for your benefit. People complain about crabgrass all the time. Crabgrass is really essential if there's like my house, for example, six houses down, there was a huge landslide, and now no one can build on this one lot. And so all the houses around here are full of crabgrass because it's stabilizing the structure. Um, Japanese knotweed is just this like problematic weed, and now they check for it and all these like agricultural inspections. And it actually started in Lyme, Connecticut, that Lyme, Connecticut, with Lyme disease. And it's a very efficient herb in the treatment of Lyme disease. And now it's everywhere in California. Like it's just followed, the progression of people getting diagnosed with Lyme. And now you have Japanese knotweed is like this what they call a weed in California. But this is an example of a sentient earth providing something that is needed. And, whether we recognize that or not, right? So, um, how can you participate in the correction of Sophia? And this is back to the astrology, where I look for the asteroid Sophia in someone's chart. And I also look for a few other asteroids that seem to be kind of significant in Gnostic terminology. And before we do Sophia, because maybe I should end with her, I want to kind of do two things. One, I'm going to read really quickly from the Secret Book of John, just from the intro. This is a great book because it actually has the text on one side, and then it has the author's notes on the other side. And Stephen Davies is a really amazing, amazing writer, and he really clarifies what's happening here. So you can kind of see, he even just says here in the introduction, he says, Gnostics know that God is all and that they themselves are God. They experience this knowledge, this realization, and know that everyone else could share their experience, but they're continually thrown back into the seemingly hard material reality that tells them they are merely flawed humans, akin to apes doomed to die, ruled by a judgmental creator God who often does not show a fondness for people at all. Gnostics rebel against their churches and their priests, their Bible-based pastors, whose obsession with God's supposed desire to control behavior seems not to be what true religion is about. To Gnostics, true religion, elite spirituality, is a realization of the divinity of every person, an experience of ascent to the divine homeland, is a knowledge of the way we once were God and of the processes of which God came to be so self-forgetful to become us, mere human beings under the control of another lesser God. These are the lessons taught in the Gnostic Gospel, the Secret Book of John. Now, why this is also kind of important is because I look at astrology and the whole system of the zodiac as it does kind of fit certain matrix requirements, like I do think it's a useful tool, but it does seem to be like a giant sky clock. And a lot of people talk about, prison planet simulation and escaping or at least removing the overlay. And if you read any Philip K. Dick, especially the Valis trilogy, this is specifically what this is about. Phyllis K. Dick had this huge breakdown where he basically had this Gnostic awakening. Um, and in his, he has this hallucination, or maybe not hallucination, of 1974 California when he was having this experience, this revelation, overlaid with Rome from I think it was like 80 BCE, and he was like a character in Rome. It's really interesting because his character in Rome, that the person that Philip K. Dick says he was in Rome, was named Thomas. And Thomas actually is linked to the Aramaic word for twin. And in real life, Philip K. Dick had a twin that died at birth, and he was always trying to connect back with this twin. So kind of an interesting parallel. He went through this really kind of crazy mental illness stage. You can read all about it in Valis. It's a very thinly veiled description of his actual mental breakdown. And in it, he basically comes to this conclusion, which he references later in Exogenesis. He says that he comes to the conclusion that there is either an overlay over the planet that we must dismantle, or we must escape. And this theme is kind of central to Gnostic themes. And we see this everywhere. We see this in like I was saying, in the Matrix. There's, the idea that we live in this really like as Charles Einstein would say, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Because we live in this world that seems magical with animals and nature. And like I said, the planet that just puts up herbs and, everything for you like in a moment's notice. But there does seem to be like this overlaying uh, sense that something's wrong, that one, humans are probably not living up to their full potential. And two, why are we being poisoned by water, by air, by foods? And three, like how much of our history is correct and how much of it was dictated by the Roman Empire? As Philip K. Dick says, he says the empire never ended, right? Eurasia has always been at war with Oceania. Is that the quote from Orwell? So how do we really know, how much of even what we believe is accurate? So I think that most people can relate to this feeling that is there something that we can do because everything feels very helpless. And I think there is something you can do. It is basically looking for the asteroid Sophia and seeing where this is in your chart. And like I said, you could be invited to help Sophia in the correction of Sophia. And I'll get more into this and where I see them, where I see the asteroids, what houses they are in, and how you can find yours in the next video.